how to administer governance and compliance in Azure. So this we've talked about this under the Azure Fundamental course, but at least we'll look at all these parts in details. Today we'll talk about subscriptions, Azure Policy, and role-based access control, which, like I've said, these are things we've actually discussed under fundamental. However, we are going to go in depth. As you can see, there are 3 labs to this module, and the first one where you will be able to manage subscriptions and RBAC. Then the next one will be how to manage governance using Azure policies. Then the last one being how to manage Azure resources with the portal. So let's take a look at this. So these are just the parts. So for each of these learning objective, here we'll be talking about regions, and like I said, almost everything we'll be discussing today, there's something we've done in the fundamental class. And if you guys, at least I know everyone here have a knowledge of all these, technologies now. And if you want to check, maybe you did not join the fundamental class and you still want to go through it, we have a playlist already. And the good thing is we have a summary class, which I posted like 3 days ago. You can take a look at that also. That should help. So we'll talk about regions, Azure subscriptions, how to identify subscription usage, how do you obtain subscription. Then we'll talk about how to create resource group, determine some of these service limits and quotas. Maybe we did not talk about that. At least you look at some of the limits, how many virtual machines can be created within the subscription, how many resources can be created within the subscription. So this is talking about the service limit and the quotas. Then we'll look at the Azure resource hierarchy, which we've discussed, under the fundamental course. Then how to apply resource tagging. You can see that almost all these things have been discussed, previously. Then manage cost. Then we can look at. Then we can take a look at, maybe a recap of all these things. So let's start with the regions. You guys understand what the regions mean. This represents the collection of data centers. However, like I've actually explained, you can have different data centers, and within that same region you can still have what we call the zones. Then let's say we have maybe 3 data centers in one zone, then another data center in another zone. The collection of all these data centers, or the collection of these zones, make up what we call a region. So as you guys can recall, we have what we call a region pair, which are regions that are 300 miles away from each other. And what does region provide? Majorly one of the reason why you have a region, is to have this replication strategy in place. It provides flexibility. It preserves data residency, data replication. So users are able to select regions close to each other. These are just some of the attributes of regions which we've actually discussed. But the truth is, what you just need to know is the collection of data centers make up what we call a region. And currently Azure have 60 plus regions, and in 140 countries as of now. And so yeah. Then we talked about subscriptions, which I said for you to be able to create any resource within your tenant or within your organization, you need what we call a subscription. The last class we talked about identity objects, like the users, groups, applications, maybe device. And for you to be able to perform operations on this identity object, you need to be assigned identity roles, Microsoft Entra ID roles, Azure AD roles, whatever you want to call it, which is different from a subscription, or which is different from roles that you need when you want to manage resources. So when you want to manage a resource, or when you want to manage a subscription, you need to be assigned a subscription role, which is also called an RBAC role. So we'll be looking at what RBAC, what is an RBAC, and what are some of the roles that can be assigned to a user to be able to manage a resource. So do not mix it up. We have roles, or what, let's call it permissions, that we can assign on a tenant to manage identity objects. And one of the role is a global administrator, which is the highest role you can have, in your tenant. Then we have the application administrator role, which if you assign that to a user, the user will be able to manage the applications within your tenant. You can assign a user administrator role for a user to be able to manage users. So all these roles I talked about are related to the identity object. However, if you want to manage virtual machines, if you want to manage app service, container instance, whatever resource you've deployed, within the organization, then you need at least, you need a role on the subscription, on the resource group, on the resource itself, whatever or wherever you want to apply this role. So only identities, in Entra ID can create a subscription. Yes. So before you are able to create a subscription, you must be present within that particular tenant. And that's why you can actually create a subscription. Also, you can create a subscription while you are creating your tenant. However, the user would be created first before you go ahead to create a subscription. So if you have gone through that, for people that have created their tenant and be able to use their resource, you will notice that you created your tenant, then during that process you are asked to put in maybe your ATM card number, your credit card, your debit card number, something like that, just for verification. You will notice that you are not charged. However, I think there is a token, maybe like 10 pence or something, that was taken out of that card, and I'm sure it will have been returned. That's only for verification. So we just create that subscription. But what this is saying is you need to be an identity, in that tenant before you can create a subscription. And one thing about, let me clarify this now. When you create a subscription, let's say I invite a user to my tenant as guest user, and if that guest user creates a subscription, let's say he picks up a subscription within my tenant, that subscription will not reside in that tenant, because subscription are only assigned to users within their tenant. So if you're a guest user and I invite you to my tenant, and you create a subscription within my tenant, you will not see, don't let me even use you might, you will not see that subscription within my tenant, because your subscription will be assigned to your parent directory. Your parent directory is where that user is or was created from, So that's what we call parent directory. When we're talking about the password reset the last time, I told you, yes, I can manage users. I can do anything with users that are actually in my organization if I'm the global administrator of that tenant. However, I cannot reset the password of a user that is a guest. If you want to reset the password of a user, it needs to be reset, in the parent directory of that user account. That's the same thing that we have here, So when you have a subscription where the user account picks up the subscription, that subscription automatically will be assigned to the parent directory of that user. Then that user can now move that subscription. You can move a subscription from one tenant to another. Yes. The same way you can move a resource group from, one, subscription, to another resource, from one resource to, from you can also move a resource from one resource group to, another resource group. So these are things that we can actually do with subscription. So subscriptions are logical unit of Azure services that are linked to a user account. Just know that, for you to be able to create resources within your tenant or manage resources within your tenant, you need a subscription. Now you can see we talked about, you having different subscriptions. You can have multiple subscriptions within one tenant. So you can have the dev subscription, you can have the test subscription, you can have the production subscription. However, a subscription can only reside within a particular tenant. So this is it. We can have dev, yes, in one tenant, but that same dev subscription that we have, let's say I created a subscription and I named it dev. That dev subscription that I've named, cannot be in two different tenants at the same time. So you can only have, a particular subscription in one tenant at a time. However, do not get it confused. Don't get confused at this time. You can have multiple subscriptions within one tenant, but a particular subscription cannot be in two different tenants. So, and you can see under each of these subscription, as you can see on the screen in the image, we have different resources, different resource group within each of these subscription. At any point in time, if you have any question, do let me know. You can raise up your hand, by using the raise icon in Azure, or you can just talk and mute your mic and talk. All right, so let's go to, how to identify subscription usage. This is just telling you different types of subscriptions that we have or that you can obtain in Azure. We have different types. The first one is the free. So for people that have been able to create, their tenant and taking a free subscription or taking a subscription, you notice that you have been assigned a free subscription, which is for $200. And that $200 is just for 30 days. So however, if you consume that $200 within 3 days, you will not have access to that subscription again. So whichever comes first is either, you consume or you wait till you consume that $200 within, maybe within 30 days or within 28 days, or that subscription stays in your tenant for 30 days. After that 30 days, whatever you have created within that subscription, all your resources, everything, the summary is you will not be able to manage that subscription anymore, except if, and that's one of the reasons why you are being asked to add your card for verification. You can now turn that subscription from free to pay as you go. But for the purpose of learning, do not do that. If you change it to pay as you go, I will not tell you the rest, but don't do that for the purpose of, um, learning. You rather create maybe a dev tenant, using that link that I've sent to you guys, and just use that to carry out, your testing. Then we have what we call the pay as you go. Can you say that again? Let me see. You can. No, so for the dev for now, since it's actually for testing, as far as you are using that, you are not going to be charged. I think you can continue using that. I don't think there's a limit or restriction on that particular dev subscription. So yeah, so you can continue using that. And the good thing is when you guys, maybe when you complete this course and you go for the certification exam. If you pass it, you will get a subscription, for free. That's the subscription I use, and that will be for life as far as you continue to be a Microsoft certified trainer. But when we get there, well, at least let's focus on what we have at now. So we have the pay as you go, which at the end of the day, you will be charged every month. So it is what you used, you will be charged for. So that's not free. It's pay as you go. Then another subscription that we have is the CSP subscription. So the CSP is, we have some people we call the cloud solution provider. They are partners. So what they do is, let's say you want to create an Azure environment. Now you contact the partner. The partner will help you set up your organization in Azure, and they will be the one to, set up the subscription. However, when you want to pay, you need to go through them. When you want to raise support, you go through them. So they manage the subscription. They manage everything in the tenant for you. You manage your identity object, but they manage, everything related to subscription, billing, and everything for you. So those guys are CSP. Then we have the enterprise. This is focused or targeted at large scale organization. And the last one is student subscription, and this will give you $100 for 12 months. So but you need to verify, that student. That's why I said, for the people that have completed, I'm so sorry, you will not be able to make use of this. However, for current students, you can still take this. So okay, so let's move away from there. Now, this is just telling you how you can actually obtain a subscription based on whatever subscription type you want to go for. The enterprise agreement, where you can actually obtain, enterprise subscription. We have the reseller, then the partner that we talked about. Then we have, the personal account, which is the one you can take. Then let's move on to resource groups. I'm sure you guys at least understand what resource groups are. Resource groups are containers, let's say they are virtual containers, or let's say logical containers that are used to how can I put this? Separate our resources. So we have before you can create we talked about the hierarchy, where we explained that, at the top of the hierarchy, we have the management group. If you want to manage multiple subscriptions within your tenant, then you can have one hierarchy, one management group, then assign those subscriptions to that management group. Then after that management group, we have the subscription itself, and you can have multiple resource groups under one subscription. Then within the resource group is where you create your resource. So you cannot create a resource without a resource group. So that's why you always have to have a resource group, which is logically separating your resources. So you can have a resource group. Let's say you have just one subscription. So you can have a resource group to say, this is the production resource group. There is another resource group for dev. There's another resource group for test, for QA, whatever you want to name it. And one thing is, this resource group, you can create your resource group in different, region. The fact that I've created maybe my resource group in maybe East Europe, doesn't mean I cannot add resources from different regions to that resource group. So you can have resources created, within different regions added to a particular resource group. So I can create a resource and create it in West Europe, create another resource, create it in East Europe, another one in East US or US East, US South, whatever the name of the region, and have all those resources added to just one particular resource group. So you can have different services, different resources, created and added to just one resource group. Then we'll talk about, the fact that resource group cannot be renamed. So at the point where you are configuring or creating your resource group, you need to be sure of the name. You cannot rename it. If you want to rename, you need to delete. And also, they cannot be nested in the sense that you cannot have a resource group within another resource group. So that's not going to happen. So as you can see, I just explained that you can move resources, between two resource groups. So if I decide that, okay, this resource needs to go to another resource group, I can move it. However, there are exceptions to this. Maybe, during the course of this our class, you get to see some resources that cannot be moved. Okay, so these are just limits based on maybe the usage, based on how many resources can be created, within this particular resource group. So this is what the service limit and quota is talking about. So you can see how many resources, the default when it comes to the subscription quota, and it tracks the usage, how you're using the subscription, how you're deploying your resources, So the good thing is when it gets to a particular quota, you can raise a support request to Microsoft and they will increase the quota if, that applies to that particular subscription. I'm sure Biola can tell us more about that. Then we'll move on to, the hierarchy that we just explained. Then you guys notice that almost everything I'm explaining now are some stuff that we've done under the fundamental course. So yeah, I just explained that for you to be able to create a resource group, to create a resource, you need a resource group. Before you can create a resource group, you need, a subscription. And before you can create, not before you can create a subscription, if you want to manage multiple subscription now, you need to have, a management group. So we can have different management groups, then we can have what we call a root management group. Then if you want to manage, so that's what the hierarchy here. If you have a root management group, you can have, multiple management group. Then within each of these management group, you can have another management group, or you can have subscription. All these things you can see is just for you to be able to manage, the resources at once. So anyone assigned a role, sorry, anyone assigned a role on this root management group will be able to manage every other, resource you can see here, the subscription, the management groups, and the likes. If I'm assigned a role on the, human resource management group, I will only be able to manage the dev tech subscription and this apps management group. If I'm assigned a role on the IT, management group, I will only be able to manage the production, and under the production, I will be able to manage the geo, everything under the geo region 1 and the geo region 2. This is what, and one of the reasons, for you to have management group is to be able to at least, manage all resources, at once, or manage all subscriptions at once, or you want to at least create a policy and it's still under management, create a policy and target all the resources at once, or you want to at least segregate the spending, the cost, whatever reason why you want to, separate your subscriptions or resources. So you go with this hierarchy. Then another thing for cost management is the tagging, the resource tagging, which also creates, um, a logical grouping. So when you have a tag, like I've actually explained, let's say we want to tag um, the resources based on departments that are within the organization. So if anyone is using a particular resource, we want to know from which department, as this or is the resource created for. Or we want to tag based on the environment. We want to tag, let's say we have 3 virtual machines, and those virtual machines, we want to tag them based on the environment. Let's say production, dev, test. So if I open that, or if I log into the portal and I try to start the virtual machine, on that virtual machine blade, I can see the tag to say this machine is for production. So at the end of the day, we can get the cost for just production resources. We can get the cost for, dev resources. We can get the cost for, um, QA resources. So you just want to, logically organize your resources based on the organization policy. It might be based on environment. It might be based on department. It might even be based on users. So that's just one of the ways to manage cost. And there are more other ways, to manage cost. And one of the things I've actually said in the last class is cost are resource specific. When you spin up a virtual machine, what you will be built for a virtual machine is different from what you will be built, when you spin up, let's say, a database. Also, the bills might vary based on the region where you are spinning up this particular resource. So if I spin up the virtual machine in East US, it might not be the same cost if I spin it up in South Africa, region. So that's it. Then cost, for inbound and outbound data differs. We explained that, let's say you actually leveraging Azure technology for backing up your data. Then when you do inbound, which is moving your data from maybe your on-premises environment to the cloud, you might not be charged. However, when you do the outbound data transfer, when you want to, let's say, something happened on your on-premises environment and you need to retrieve the backup from Azure, you will be charged. So the costs are different. Then you can do prepay, or with Azure Reserve Instance, there is something we call the Reserve Instance, which is not the pay as you go, So depending on if you want to go with the pay as you go, or so this is like um, um, we've explained during the course of, we explaining the difference between OPEX and CAPEX. Someone gave a very good example to say, prepaid and postpaid. So we can have what we call the reserve instance, and that's more of, prepayment. Then we have what we call, the hybrid benefit. Let's say, yes, we want to move to the cloud, and the operating system on our system, on our servers, Windows operating system, Windows 2016, Windows 2020, Windows 2012, and the likes, whatever Windows we are using, the operating system we're using. Yes, when we move to the cloud, are you saying we need to start buying operating system again? No, so you can leverage on that benefit. So that's what we call the hybrid benefit, where you can still make use of the fact that you have that operating system. You get a discount, you get some benefit, when you're spinning up or when you're moving to the cloud, just because, you're currently using Microsoft technology and you've got, like some licenses on your on-premises environment. And on that, what some of the things the cost management blade does if you have taken a look at the course management blade in the portal, you can create alert from there. It gives you course recommendation. It advises you to say, hey man, if you continue using this resource this way, this is how much you will pay. This is how much this is what you can do to limit how much you pay. You can get the budget, you can get advices based on whatever is going on in your tenant. All right, that's that about cost management. Then this is just some of the learning recaps. Give me a minute. All right, give me a minute, please. All right, so let's talk about configuring Azure policies. Now, for Azure policy, I've explained that these are like laws that you make, in the Azure environment to make your resource and data compliant. So let's say, take for example, we want to make sure that users don't create virtual machine within our tenant, or users don't create, let's say, users don't create public IPs, within our tenant, because we want to be security compliant. We want to make sure that we don't get exposed. So there are lots of laws, there are a lot of things you can actually do. You can actually set in the tenant, and this is what we call the policies. So let's take a look at how we can actually do some of these policies. So we'll look at how to implement Azure policies. What are Azure policies? Then we'll talk about, how to create maybe two demonstration. Then under these policies, we have what we call the policy definition, just like the title. Then what are the scope? How do we, are people being logged out? I can see, okay, maybe network though. So under this, we create the scope, which is where do you want to apply this policy? Is it on the subscription? Is it on the resource itself, or is it on a resource group? And that's the the scope. Then we determine the compliance, and that's that about this. So what are Azure policies? Okay, Azure policies are, let's say, is a service which are used to manage data compliance, or which are used to make sure that users in the tenant stay compliant. So what this does is it runs what we call an evaluation for non-compliant resources. So if we create a policy now to say no one should be able to create a virtual machine in a tenant, the policy will check if there is a virtual machine within the tenant. It will check if anyone is creating the policy. If the resource has already been created, you will get a flag, on that resource or on that policy, that there are some resources that are not compliant. But if the resource has not been created before, this policy will block the creation of that resource. So, and that you can see, it enforces compliances, it applies, it remediates. So some of the use cases is we want to allow, which, like I said, maybe we do not want to allow the creation of the virtual machine. So we want to specify what are some of the allowed resources that can be created within this particular tenant. And that's why you can see allowed resource type. Then we want to allow some particular size, let's say some particular sizes, of virtual machine. we do not want people to be creating high-end virtual machine. So, and that's what we call the SKU. We want to make sure that only this particular, size of virtual machine can be created when you are creating a virtual machine. So we can do, okay, allowed virtual machine SKU. Then allow location. Like I said, in order to be data compliant, an organization in the UK do not want their resource to be created within the South Africa region, even when we feel like it might be cheaper if we create it within the South Africa region. However, there are bodies that checks, the compliances, the organizational compliance when it comes to data. And that's why we want to create a policy to restrict users from creating resources within locations that are not allowed or outside our region. And that's it. And again, you can create a policy to make sure that every resource that is created within your Azure environment are being tagged. If you do not tag that particular resource, you should not be able to create it. And that's why, then the last one here, which is these are some of the examples of the policies you can create. You can think of anything, depending on the organization need, and create that policy, to make sure that, everything is followed, accordingly. So you can create another policy just to make sure that, Azure Backup is enabled for all the virtual machine that you create. So if I create a machine now in Azure, I want to make sure that, we enable Azure Backup so that, everything we have on that virtual machine is backed up. These are just some of the use cases, like I said. So for you to be able to, create a policy, there are three things or processes to go through. The first thing is you need to define, what's going to be what's the policy going to be all about, and that's what we call the policy definition. So that's where we define what the policy needs to do, what are things that need to be checked, before resources can stay compliant. And that's why, you can see within that. So you need to create what we call the policy definition. And the next one is the scope. Where do you want to apply this resource? As you can see, I'm sure by now you guys will at least you understand some of the icons now. So when you see this key, something like this is talking about subscriptions, So is it going to be applied on the subscription, or maybe on the resource group, or on the management group, depending on where you want to apply that particular policy. So if I apply it on the management group, that means all the resources within all the subscriptions that are within that particular management group, that policy would apply to all of them. But if I create that policy and then assign it, to just a subscription within a management group, only resources within that, subscription, that's where the policy will apply to. And if you do the same on the resource group, it will not apply to all the resources within that subscription. It will only apply to, resources within that particular resource group. So depending on the scope and, wherever you want to apply this to is what we call the scope. Then they can now, once that is created, then the policy starts assessing, if subscriptions or if resources are compliant to that particular resource. So this demonstration, we are to show how to, create a policy. So I will skip that till the end of the class. Then we can just look at, how to create a policy, how to assign that policy, then how to check for remediation and the like. All right. The last one that we'll be talking about today is, how to configure role-based access control. when we started the class, I talked about the fact that, we have identity objects like the users, groups, applications, devices, whatever. And those guys are actually, related to the directory, related to the tenant, you know. To be able to manage those identity objects, you need to be assigned a permission on the tenant to be able to do that. However, to be able to manage resources, you need to be assigned a role or a permission on the subscription or on the resource group or on the resource itself, or even on the management group, whichever, whatever you need that user to be able to access. Now, that subscription roles that is assigned, to a user account to be able to manage resource is what we call RBAC, which is the role-based access control. So before you can manage resources, you need to be assigned an RBAC role. So here we'll compare RBAC roles to Entra ID roles, which we've done already, but at least we'll take a look at that. Then we'll look at how to create, role definition, role assignment, what are RBAC authentication, then a demonstration on Azure RBAC. So let's start with comparing RBAC roles to Entra ID roles. So like I said, for you to be able to manage your resource, you need to be assigned, an RBAC role, and that's why you can see here, manage access to Azure resources. And for Entra ID roles, which are tenant roles, they manage access to Entra ID objects, and those objects are what we've talked about, the users, groups, and application. Then here, the RBAC role can be scoped at specific level or multiple levels. It might be to just on the subscription. You can scope it to the resource itself, or maybe to the management group, or even on the resource groups. So depending on where you want the user to manage, to be able to manage those resources on. So if it's just a particular resource, let's say we have a user that would only need that user to manage our virtual machine, there is no need for us to assign a role on the resource group where that virtual machine is created if we have other resources created within that resource group. That means we only need that user to be able to, access that virtual machine and not other resources. So we'll only assign a role to that user on the resource itself and not on, just picture the hierarchy wherever you want the user to manage resources on, that's where you assign a role, to that user account. But here, you cannot do that with, tenant. Even when there are specific roles that can be assigned to a user, and the user will only be able to perform operation based on the roles that has been assigned. So if I want users to be able to manage just application and not users, I will only assign an application administrator role. The user will be able to manage, So what I'm trying to say is there is no hierarchy when it comes to Azure Entra ID. It's just a flat structure. So managing objects there, roles are only assigned to users, not on multiple levels, but whatever role you have assigned is whatever operation the user can actually carry out. But on the RBAC, you can assign roles on multiple levels. Then the same way roles can be accessed, in the portal, the CLI, Azure PowerShell, resource template, which are some of the different tools for managing your users or for managing your resources we've talked about in our previous, fundamental course. The same way, we have tools that you can manage your objects, your Entra ID object with, like the Microsoft Graph, the PowerShell, the portal, which you guys should get to see, because there are labs on each of these tools that I mentioned here. So you still get to perform those. So another thing, I think before we go, we have two different, hold on, let me just quickly, so we have what we call the built-in roles and the custom roles. So for the built-in roles are roles that have been created by Microsoft. If you feel this role doesn't work for what you want, maybe you want to assign a user just to start and stop a virtual machine. You do not want that user to be able to create a virtual machine or delete that virtual machine, because if you assign a virtual machine administrator role, the user will be able to perform all operations on that virtual machine. So you can create what we call a custom role, to say the user should only be able to start and stop this virtual machine. So you can create a role like that so that the user is only able to start and stop that machine. Larry, please go on.
Thank you. I've been seeing API. I don't really know what API is used. What is API and what is it used for?
Just like when you have an application, we call something the front end in application. The front end is what you can see when you log into whatever um whatever
Is it
user
is it
account.
safe for? Oh, sorry,
All right, go ahead,
sorry.
please.
Yeah, is it safe for us to call the API the middleman?
Yes, it's the middleman. So this is it. Like, I'll give you a very good example now. Um, if you use LenFi to transfer money home, when you log into your LenFi account, you will notice that when you want to add your money, you know, it will tell you you need to integrate with your bank account. You know, it goes away from the LenFi account to whatever bank account you're using. Then you go there to authorize it. So this is it. Let's say Revolut created their own back application. LenFi created their own back application. Now, for us to be able to connect these guys together, we need what we call an API. So you will notice, I'm sure if you have used LenFi to send money home, you will notice that LenFi will go out of, when you are in the LenFi, you are logging, when you want to add money, it will go out of that LenFi account and it will redirect you, to your back account application. Then when you authorize the money, it will take you back to the LenFi. So that connection is done, by the API. Larry, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right. All right. So this is just the way, I talked about the fact that you can create your custom role if you feel like the built-in roles doesn't work for you. Let's say you want to limit what the user can do. So we can do what we call, custom role creation. And within the custom role, you want to create what we call the role definition, meaning what are some of the things the user can do, what are some of the things the user cannot do. When we finally create this custom role and assign that role to that user. So you can see there are different type of roles that we have in there, which you guys will see if you want to assign a role to yourself or to another user on your subscription, on your resource group. I will show you guys all those roles. Now, we have, like the same way we have a global admin role, which I said is the topmost role, when you are managing um, Azure Object ID or Entra ID Object ID. Now, the same way we have that global admin role, we have what we call an owner role on the subscription. That owner role is the highest role you can assign to a user. When you assign that owner role, that user can actually add users, it can assign a role to other users. It can create anything. It can manage anything within that, scope that you have assigned that role to on. So we have another role called the contributor role. Just like the owner role, it has all the permission the owner role has. However, the only difference is the fact that the user cannot assign, a role to another user. And that's what you can see here. So here, when you have something like asterisk, it means, so this is saying, what are the actions that this user can do? And we are saying this user can do anything. So when you have asterisk, it means it's an open-ended, permission. The user can perform all operations within that particular scope. And here, they've created not action, meaning these are things the user should not be able to do. Do you understand? And within that, they've said the user should not be able to delete, should not be able to write. So when you see write means create, create. Then here, the user should not be able to elevate access, which means the user should not be able to, add another user on another scope. Should not be able to assign a role, to users, on that particular subscription or on that particular resource group or on, anything. So then we move ahead to what we call the data action, which are, permissions that are specific to, the roles or the data plane. These are, let's say, for example, if a user has a read, let's say a read access, to a storage account, then the user should be able to read only within that particular storage account. So those are data actions. But here we have no data action. Then here we have assignable scope, meaning where do you want to assign this role to? Is it on the subscription? Is it on the resource group? Or just on the resource? So you need to specify it here. And if it's not specified, it's just open-ended, meaning we can assign it to, maybe any scope, maybe on the user, maybe on the resource, maybe on the resource group, the management group, or anything. So you still get to see it. We'll create a custom role and you guys can see how to do that. So create a role assignment. Role assignment is just telling you, when you create a role, this is the process of assigning a role, to a particular user. So the binding of role assignment to users, groups, service principal. So one of the reasons why we create a group is, let's say we want to assign a role to multiple users. I have, let's say, 300 users that needs to be assigned an owner role or a virtual machine, administrator role. I do not want to start assigning those roles one after the other, to each of those users. I'd rather create a group and add all those users to the group and assign a role to that group. So you can do that. You can assign a role to a user, you can assign a role to a group. And also, this service principal is what we call an application. So you can also assign a role to a particular application. So that's just the role assignment. You get to see it. So in the tenant, you can assign different roles, just like the global admin role, the application admin, application developer, the billing admin, whatever roles, whatever thing you need the user to be able to do, you can do that here. Then we have what we call, elevated access. That elevated access only applies to a global admin. So a global admin in this tenant, even when that global admin is not assigned any role on the subscription, Okay, let me explain this before I start talking about the elevated access. Now, if you are not assigned a role on a subscription, or you are not assigned a role on the resource, you might not be able to see that subscription. You might not be able to see it because you don't have a role. There is no reason for you, to see that subscription. So most times you might need to be assigned a role on a subscription before you are able to see that subscription. So some subscription can be in your tenant and you will not have access to it because there is no role assigned to you on that subscription. But for a global admin, a user that has been assigned a global admin, that user can elevate his access. I will show you how that user can elevate his access. If the user elevates his own access, he will be able to see all the subscription within that tenant, even when it has not been assigned a role. So that's what we call elevated access. So he will elevate his own access to be able to view all the subscription within that tenant. However, before he can actually manage those subscriptions or manage, those resources, you still need to be assigned a role on that subscription or on that particular resource. So if the global admin elevates his own access, he can then assign a role to himself. But if you have a global admin role, doesn't mean you can actually, manage a particular resource. You still need to be assigned a role on that particular resource. But you can do that, by yourself by elevating the access, then assign a role. That's why we always say make sure that you don't have more than 2 global administrators within your tenant, or else, once you assign a global admin role, that's the end of it. That person can manage everything within that tenant. But if you are assigned an owner role, you cannot elevate your access. It doesn't go that way. But if you are assigned a role, a global admin role within the tenant, you can elevate your access to see the subscription. Okay. So demonstration is we need to locate, the control blade, see some of the roles permission and add a role assignment. So we'll look at that. Okay, so that brings us to the end of that's Azure Policy, RBAC, and subscription. So there are 2 labs. One is to manage the subscription and RBAC, and then the other one is to create policies to manage governance within your environment. So I'm sure you guys have the the link to the labs. You can take a look at it. But the task is to implement what we call the management group, assign a built-in role, which I've actually explained. Then the task 3 is for you to create a custom RBAC role. Then monitor role assignment with activity log. Because the last time we explained that anything you do within your tenant will be logged in your activity log. So that's why they ask you to monitor role assignment with the activity log. The last one, so this is just the architecture of what you need to do. This is the task, assign a role, built-in role, create another role, then check their activity log. And the last one, which is the second lab, is to create tags and assign the tags, and force the tag to say no person should be able to create a resource without assigning a tag to a resource. And you need to apply, then create and test resource log. Okay, I think these are some of the things that were actually in the previous. Can you guys still see my screen? Okay, in the previous labs. Okay, this is just telling you. All right, so that's that. I think I've got some other, yeah, that's the end of the presentation. These are just additional, additional documentation just to explain, how do we implement this RBAC. Are you looking at assigning this to, maybe a principal, an object? What is the definition that you want to create? definition that explains the permission that you want to give, which we have explained, the scope, then when you want to assign, that particular role. And hold on, please. So determine what role do you want to. This just explain the differences between, like I've said, an owner role with all the permissions, then a contributor. It has all the permissions just like an owner role, but it cannot grant access to others on that particular, subscription or roles. Then we have the reader. A reader is just a user with a read permission. It can only see, but it cannot create or modify anything. Then this user access administrator is when you elevate yourself, from global administrator, this is the role you'll be assigned. You'll be assigned, user access administrator, and you are able to manage all the resources. This is just to review, resource management. We talked about the Azure Resource Manager, which is the ARM, that I've explained that, whatever resource you are creating within your tenant is managed by what we call an Azure Resource Manager. So it does the creation, the deletion and everything. So yeah, these are just some of the terminologies that you can take a look at, what are resource group, resource manager template, declarative class, syntax, resource provider, and this just shows you, how to manage resource logs. So let's go ahead and perform our demonstration. Do you guys have any question before I go ahead to do that? Okay, let me choose this other one. Are you guys still there? Just need to be sure.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. All right, so let's do some demonstrations. So the demonstration is going to be, about the governance, which is talking about, to create a policy and manage this policy. So to create a policy, so this is the subscription I talked about. You can see I've got a subscription here, and this is telling me, I have £21 left. Even when I've been assigned, I think it's $150. I think that is like £120 every month. And on this subscription, you can see I'm the owner of this subscription. And this subscription, what's the scope of this subscription? You can see the scope is on the tenant root group. Because of that permission now, if I create multiple management group, I can still manage anything within that management group. If I create multiple subscription, anything on this resource group, I can create another resource, another subscription, and still add it to this tenant root group, so that once I'm assigned a role on this tenant root group, I'll be able to manage, everything, in the environment. So this is just telling us. And here it shows you the subscription blade, where you can see the cost analysis. You can see the cost based on per resource, based on my spending, what's consuming my money, here it's going to tell you from what time to what time are you billed for, what's the role, what's the kind of subscription that you currently have, so what's the subscription ID. I can decide to cancel this subscription. I told you guys that if at any point in time you can move a subscription from one tenant to another. So you can do that from here. I can just click on, move, change directory, and that will change this subscription directly from this tenant to another tenant. And here you can see this is the billing cycle of this particular subscription. Coming down, on the cost management, you would be able to see the analysis, the advisor. This has analyzed what are some of the services that are taking, the huge cost on my subscription. You can see the storage here, what region, East US, what resource group. You can see CICD. Then you can take a look at the budget. So I do not have any budget except if I have one. Same thing. I have not created any alert, but I can see the, advisor here, which are some of the recommendations that can get, if I want to at least minimize my spending. On that blade also, you can see all the resource group that you have created. You can see all the resources that exist within that particular resource group. So you can see if any policy has been assigned, on that subscription, you can see those policies have been created. So let's start by, focusing on what we need to do. Now, I'm going to divide this into two, and I'm going to go back to my, I'm going to go back to my, so sorry. I'm going to go back to, okay, so we have presentation. Okay, so this is what, oh, really? Wow, I didn't know. Okay, so we're just going to manage that. Oh, where is it? Okay, so this is telling me to, the demonstration is to assign a policy, then create and assign an initiative definition, check for compliance, check for remediation tags, and the like. So for us to be able to assign a policy, so let's start by, even when I can go here and click on the policies, you can see the compliance, some of the resources are not compliant, the remediation. This is the definition that needs to be created. So you can actually create your initiative, you can create your policy definition. So yeah, I'm going to go back to, from here, you can search for policies, from there, you can see the policy. Give me a minute, please. Okay, that's fine. So I'm still going to come here. So let's look at this. So let's click on that. So I'm going to ask a question, since no one is asking me this question. What's the difference between policy definition and policy initiative definition? You guys are not talking. Can you guys still hear me?
Let's think about it.
Okay. So initiative definition is a collection of policy definition. You understand? So policy definition defines just one policy, but initiative definition, when you have collection of related policies, that's the meaning. All right, so let's go back. So the first thing say we should assign a subscription, a policy. So we need to click on the assignment, then here, assign policy. So here, where do we want to assign a policy? Do we want to assign it on the subscription itself? What scope do we want to pick? Or is it just on maybe the resource group, wherever you want to create this. So if I pick this, that means that policy that I'm assigning will, cut across all the resource group present within this particular, resource group. Now let's leave it at, now exclusion. Do you want to exclude? Maybe I want to exclude a particular, resource, or so I can click on that resource group, or I want to exclude a particular, resource group. So if I click on this test, I can exclude. So that policy will not apply on all the resources within this particular, resource group. Or, if I want to pick a particular resource, then exclusion. So this exclusion, so it will, when you create the resource, you are going to be getting, instead of getting not compliant or compliant, you are going to be getting exempt, because that particular resource or resource group has been exempted from that policy. Do you guys get? So yeah, you can give it a name, what's your policy definition, whatever name you want to give it, then what's going to be the assignment name, what is going to be, displayed, there are different available definition here, which are, like I said, the definitions are policy that you've created. Do we want to make sure that we enable login by category group? Do we want to make sure that Azure backup should be enabled for every application, for every virtual machine, which was one of the usage example they gave us. So you can leave it as the same name, or you can put a name, and I can even copy this name also and add it to the description. So here, do you want to enforce it, or do you want to disable it? Then who is assigning this policy? Then I can put my name as, assigned by, maybe Baba Femi or anything. Then, let's say, oh, so this, you can go ahead to create, when I go ahead, it's going to create my policy, which it's something you can see here. It has created my policy. Now, you can now create and assign an initiative, the definition, if you want to create, at least multiple policies, like I've said. So to do that, all you need to is just to go to the definition, select initiative definition, create your initiative definition. You can use a existing one if you want to pick from, let's say, let's look for maybe compute, so since this policy that I just created aligns with, can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
We can hear you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Since this policy that I've just created aligns with virtual machine, so it comes under compute, do you understand? Then I can say, I can just give it a name to say maybe virtual machine backup, whatever. You can create your own if you do not want to use from the existing one, so so I can just go ahead to create my category and name it maybe something like this. I don't even know my name anymore, something like this. So I can add, let's say, from, okay, let's say, yeah, that this is good. So let's say policies. You can add a policy definition to this policy, if you want to do that, maybe the one I just created, or the other one, if you want to add. So I can add multiple. And that's why, like I said, these are, initiative. If you have the initiative definition is combination of multiple, policy file. This is just a group initiative parameter. Yeah, so we can go ahead to at least create, and this has zero policies added to it if you want to go ahead to create, So that's how, let's say, let me just add one, um, these are just virtual machines, audit VM. So you can, whatever, you can add multiple. That's just the good thing. So you can create initiatives. Okay. Create an initiative parameter. This is just to say allowed value. This can be, location. I can do allowed location, whatever you need to do. So I'm just going to, so let's say you only want to allow, this initiative within that particular location or something like that. Let me just close it. Then the last one is check for compliances. Now, just like we can see some of the policies that have been created, initiatives that have been created, you can check for compliance. You can see out of, let's say, if I click on this initiative, you can see multiple policies created under that particular initiative. And inside that, if you click on each of those policies, you can check for compliance. Now, this is saying resource by compliance, enable threats capabilities for these resources. Now, they have not been enabled, and that's why it's showing you 4 of these particular resources that are in here are not compliant. So you can take a look at those. So we have 20 20 resources, 20 groups, 20 policies on that particular. I want to see, okay, resource compliance. These are the resources. They are, some of them are compliant. 8 out of 20. You can see it will tell you their compliance state, it will tell you the resource, it will tell you the location where those resources are, the scope, the last time that resource was authenticated to. So it will tell you if they are compliant or not. So that's what. And the last one is to check for the remediation tax. To check for the remediation, just the way you check for the compliance, you can check for the remediation. How can you remediate? How can you make those non-compliant resources stay compliant? So you can reevaluate, you can check what are things you need to do to make sure that those resources stay compliant. And then once you are done with your lab, you can go back and remove whatever policies or definition or assignment that you've created. So if I exempt, when I was telling you the other time, if I exempt any resource or resource group, you will see those resources under these exemptions, a blade. That's that. Okay, so let's take a look at the other one. Okay, so the definition, like I said, depending on the scope where you want to assign, your RBAC to users on, it might be on the subscription, it might be on the management group. So you need to locate the access control blade, which is the access control. This is on the subscription. You can see if I click on the access control, which is the IAM, if I go to maybe a resource group and I click on this resource group, you will still see I have the same thing. If I click on, let's say, the resources within, this particular resource group, let's say the CI/CD, and I pick one of these resources, then, the same thing. So depending on where you want to assign your resource, you just need to determine what's the scope, and any of those scope, you can check the role assignments. You can see these are different role assignments that have been assigned to users um, on this particular resource. So these are users' accounts. You can see owner role has been assigned to these users. Then we have applications that has been assigned contributor roles. I told you not only users' accounts are assigned roles. We can assign role to a group. We can assign role to users. We can assign role to service principal, which are called applications. So you can see these are users. I told you about the fact that if we elevate the access of a particular user to see all the subscription within that particular tenant, they will be assigned user access administrator. And you can see the application that had been assigned, just some minimum permission on the key vault, meaning what they can only do. You can see key vault certification officer. He can only manage certificates. So depending on what you want the user to be able to do. So we have different roles. Let's look at some of those roles that you can have. You can see owner role, contributor role. Lots of them are in here, lots of roles. Depending on what you want the users to do, you can see 519 roles. So I can decide to add users, which is the role assignment they talked about. So if I click on this role assignment, this is going to tell me, what do you want to assign? Do you want to assign a privileged role like owner, contributor, or you want to assign just specific roles? You only want the user to be able to create, certificate or manage certificates, or you only want the user to be able to manage this key vault. Key vault is a resource just like virtual machine, so don't get confused. So you only want these users to be able to read, anything on that resource. So I can pick any of those roles, so you can search. So let's say, so yeah, if I pick this role, then that user will be assigned, that role. Then who do you want to assign to? You can see the selected role. Is it a user, group, or service principal? We have what we call the manage identity, but don't worry. So manage identity are also identity objects. However, they are identity that are attached to a particular resource. So each resource in the tenant has its own managed identity, just like an application. You know, this is just to say, instead of creating an application and assigning that application, to a resource again, because we just want that user, that particular resource we've created, we want the identity. Let's say I need a virtual machine. I want that virtual machine to be able to access a particular another resource like a database. That means I need to give the virtual machine a role on the database. How do I do this? I need to create a service principal, which is an application, and assign that application to that virtual machine. Then assign a role to that virtual machine, that service principal on the database. Because here you cannot assign a role to a resource, but for our virtual machine, because let's say we are hosting our application within our virtual machine, that virtual machine needs to talk to our database. That means we need to assign a role to that virtual machine on the database. How do we do this? So we need to create an application, and that's called the service principal. Then assign that service principal a role on the database and attach the service principal to the virtual machine. Instead of doing that, we can go to the virtual machine and create what we call a managed identity, which is an identity of that particular virtual machine. So I will show you guys. So let's click on one of the virtual machine. I will show you the identity I'm talking about. So if I go to my virtual machines, I click on this virtual machine and I scroll down, you can see identity for the virtual machine. Now we have what we call the system assign and user assign. For now, do not worry. So if I want to assign a role to this virtual machine on another resource, I need an identity object because roles can only be assigned to identity object. So I need to turn this on. If I turn this on, this will give me an identity for this machine. And you can see object, identity object. Then I can now assign a role to this particular guy. So let's even assign a role to this guy. If I click on this, I go back to this, then so so I need to select who I want to assign these roles to. So now this is saying you have a particular virtual machine. I can search for that manage identity. Okay, we have just one manage identity assigned already. Yeah, which is this one, which is the lab the lab virtual machine. Then I can pick that, then assign a role. You can see that means I've assigned a role to this virtual machine on the key vault. Then I can go ahead to review this role, then click on the assignment. The same way I've assigned a role to this guy, I can assign a role. So if I check the role assignment now, you will see that I've assigned, a role to that virtual machine, which is a reader role, on the key vault. That's how we assign roles. So you can check all the roles. We can even add another role. Let's go back here. So if I want to view my own role, I can click on that, view my assets. These are assets that I've actually, that I have on that particular, resource. This eligible assignment will get there. This is when we talk about PIM, Privileged Identity Management. If you do not want to assign a permanent role to a particular identity, so you want that user to only request for a role when they need it, that's why we do the PIM. Okay, the last one, I think that's that. Yeah, so add a role. Yeah. So let's go back to subscription now. I think there are things we can still do here. Yeah. So on the subscription, we talked about the fact that, let's say you want to create a custom role. You do not want to use the inbuilt roles because all these roles that I've shown you, are actually inbuilt roles that have been created by Microsoft. And that's why you can see built-in roles. What if we want to create our own role? You can do that from here, add, but you need to be assigned an owner role on the resource or on the subscription to be able to perform this. So if you go there and you are not seeing that, or you are not able to click it, just know that you don't have the permission. So, or I can just go here and add. So this is how we create a custom role. You can give it a name to say test custom. You will see this when you're performing your. So do you want to start from scratch? No, I want to clone a role. What role do you want to clone? I want to clone a contributor role. This will give me all the, permission, all the actions, everything about contributor role. Then I can remove or add to it. Then, yeah, this guy is able to, these are permissions that have been assigned. This guy is not, this is the permission that has been assigned to this user. However, this guy is not able to do this. But I want this guy to be able to assign, permissions to other users. So I can remove that from the not action. And if I go ahead to create this guy will be able to assign a role to another user on any resource because I've removed that from the non-action. So you can edit, or let's look for a role like the virtual machine administrator. Yes, let's look that. These are permissions. This guy can read, but I only want this guy to be able to at least so you can go here and add more permissions. Whatever permission you want to assign to this user. I can look for virtual machine roles. Oh, sorry. Virtual. Yeah. So okay, let's see. It should come out, but I think it should come out under compute. Yes. So virtual machine, Microsoft Compute. Yes. So what do you want this guy to be able to do? I want this guy to be able to delete virtual machine skill sets. I can add that. I want this guy to be able to, reapply skill set or power off virtual machine skill set. I can go ahead to, read, write, diagnose. So whatever you need to add, you can add it. You can see what's the permission, not action, action, action. Then assignable scope, where do you want to assign this permission to? Because I'm creating this on the subscription, this is going to be assigned on the subscription. So if you do not want to do that from the portal, you can do the same on the JSON file. The same thing, you've done on the portal. Yeah, I can go ahead to, look for something like this from maybe another role, then come to this part to add it. This was how we were doing it before, before they now, added it to. So before they added it to the portal, so I can do this also, and that's if I save this, and I go back to permissions, you see that I've added, a write permission. So then I can go ahead to include, then create that particular, role. So if I create this role, you have already fully created this test, test custom role. Then if I look for that role, sometimes it might take a while to come up, but text. Oh, yes. Okay. This is one that I've created before. You can see it's a custom role, so, but that one that I just created, it might take a while before. Yes, you can see it now, test custom role. So this role now can be assigned to any user, just like the same way you've assigned, we've been able to assign the built-in roles to different users. So that brings us to the end of the class.